Welcome to the Discover Montcalm podcast, where we're going to take a look at the communities, the businesses, the attractions, and the people that make up Montcalm County. Here is your podcast host, Duane Weed.
Hello, my name is Duane Weed, and I'm the producer of the Discover Montcalm podcast. And I want to thank you for tuning in today. We're going to jump into our Wayback Machine, go back to 2018, where I did an interview with Don Burns. He was the past president of Montcalm Community College from 1984 to 2009. Let's listen to that interview now.
Well, I guess I think of a couple things when we're talking about Montcalm County and my early years. First of all, part of those early years, my father talked a great deal about his grandfather, who came into Hubbardston, Michigan, not in Montcalm County, but almost, in 1870, with 4 boys and his wife. And he would spend the winters working in what they called the Northwoods, Montcalm County. I don't know for certain where, but it was part of the economy at that time. He had a cabin and he was beginning a farm, but to be productive in the wintertime, he'd go north and work in the woods. And that would have been, I'm certain, in Montcalm County. But bringing it forward quite a few years, as a youngster on the farm, we milked 30 cows. We grow oats and wheat and hay and corn. All of that was really surrounding the dairy farm.
What was the area like in 1971?
Maybe to put a little context on that, we all live and work in certain environments, and the environment that I'd been living and working in was education. I'd taught for a few years, and then I spent time at the American School. And I'd been contacted by a dean of students at Montcalm Community College indicating that there might be a position for me at the college. So I came back to the farm and then went in the process of applying for that position. Now, in terms of context in the area, actually the state of Michigan was making quite a few changes in the 60s, the early 60s. I indicated that I graduated in 1960. Shortly thereafter, the state of Michigan was redoing school systems. So what used to be Idmore became Montebello. What used to be Sheridan and Stanton became Central Montcalm. What used to be Carson City and Crystal became Carson City Crystal. So that sort of thing was taking place. Also, there used to be, I think it was called the county, I'm not certain the title, but it was a person who kind of worked with education in the area. But what were created were intermediate school districts. So the Montcalm area intermediate school district was created at that point in time.
Okay.
Legislation was passed in the state of Michigan that said this idea about providing education for people beyond high school in a little different fashion. There used to be junior colleges, but now they wanted to move to what were called community colleges. And the legislation said a K-12 could create one of those, a county could create one of those, or an intermediate school district could create one of those. So, and again, this is all before I was involved with MCC, that sort of thing, but just shortly before. These things were sort of all in motion. When I returned from Spain, I'd been gone from living in Montcalm County since 1960. It was now 1971. Didn't see big changes. The day that my wife and I moved into Greenville, we couldn't quite figure out what all the business was happening. it was a thing called the Danish Festival. It was one of the earliest years of the Danish Festival. We didn't know that it was going to be happening that day, but we were trying to get into town and get situated here, and it seemed awfully busy in little Greenville that day. You asked about the economy. You know, at that point in time, in a place like Greenville, there were businesses that had been here for a long time. Gibson Refrigeration, Tool and Die was starting up then, and the Tower and so on. So Greenville had always had a fair amount of industry compared to the rest of the county. That was in place. They had some growing businesses here. At the time, we didn't know how much it was growing. For instance, Meyer was already, before I left Grand Rapids in the early 60s, Meyer was in the process of creating this sort of superstore. I guess somewhat related to the...
It's all happening at that time.
It's all happening at that time. These are things that are connected with Montcalm County that were happening. And the idea of a community college was still a different sort of thing. People weren't sure really what it was. But it was an opportunity for people to get a couple years of college, and that too was in its infancy stages.
Let's talk about the creation of MCC. Was happening prior to you coming back, but then when you arrived, where was it?
In order to create such an entity, there were three things that had to happen. You had to have a vote of the people, and the people had to elect a board. They had to indicate that they wanted a college, and they had to generate the tax that was necessary to run that college. Again, if my memory serves me correctly, Ionia County a couple of times said, we want one, elected a board, and did not pass the taxation necessary to create one. At that time, Montcalm was, the people in the Montcalm area were simply observing this. For probably some of the best information about that place and that time, there's written materials on this of a group that came together and looked at this process. And it's difficult to really do justice to that sort of thing. I wasn't around. I've read the materials, I've talked with those people. But clearly a person who played an important role in this was a young lady named Beatrice Dozer. She was, again, a young lady. She and her husband had both been employed by General Electric, and the plant that would later become Hitachi in Idmore was at that time General Electric. She, very quiet lady, but she was a Fulbright scholar. She was a physicist. And she'd worked and lived in California for General Electric before coming here. And she saw the community college movement happen a little sooner. She saw the impact that it was making. So she had this understanding of what a community college could and should be.
So let's jump to 1971. You come back. They've asked you to apply for a job at the community college.
I started there as a counselor. It was a federally funded or a state-funded program for 1 year. It was to create what is being talked about a great deal right now. There was a need for people to be able to get some assistance to determine what kind of career they were interested in.
What was going on when your first year of presidency?
Well, let me lead a little bit first, because I arrived here in 71, and actually I became president in 84. So there was 13 years in there. In 74, I became the dean of students, and again, that had to do with the dean who was there at the time left for another opportunity, and the president at the time asked me if I would serve in that role. Maybe let me back up. When I arrived in 71, the president had just left, and then Cliff Bedore was a new president when I arrived. In 77, he retired, and Herb Stoutenberg came in as president. And shortly after Herb's coming in, then he asked me to serve in the role as vice president of the institution. So I was really working with many of the different functions of the college.
We hope you're enjoying our podcast, and we'll be back after we thank our sponsors. West Michigan Technology and Design Solutions, your IT and web hosting experts, westmichiganhelpdesk.com, and DW Video, your source for video production, websites, and your local videotape, slides, and 8mm film transfer specialist, dwvideo.com. Now, back to our interview.
Can you give me an overview of your term?
I think some of the things that come to mind are, first, internal things at the institution. And by that, I'm talking about the fact that I mentioned there are unions were being developed, lots of places. They were being developed at Montcalm. And just prior to my tenure as president, additional unions were developed at the college. And shortly after becoming president, one of the things that I, and along with staff there, determined was we had to have a better way of dealing with all of that. And so we got training out of Columbia University, and when it moved into a thing called mutual gains bargaining. And it's something that really helped, I think, move the institution forward, because what we learned through all of that were ways of coming together and learning how to work through difficult situations and do what's best for the common good of the institution. The other thing that happened during that period of time, I mentioned that we had received some additional funding from the local area and renewed that, and that was in the mid-'80s to the late '80s. But based on that, we grew, and by the early '90s, once again, we were running out of space. At this point, our difficulties were, our facilities were getting a little older. We were running out of space. Enrollments were up. We needed more resources to do what could be done. So we entered into communication with people around the area. We had we had several attempts before successfully passing additional millage, another $1.25 which was really important for the institution. That came into being in the late '90s. It made big differences in the kind of curriculum we could move forward, and then also in the very visible things of a college. It was at that point where we needed to update and redo the campus, and so there were big changes there. We built what is known as the Dozer building on campus, which started connecting the other buildings on campus. And with those things in place, a next step was the fact that there was a need for a lot of training which wasn't on campus. And we'd rented spaces here or there, but we were able to get state support, and we were able to build in Greenville what we called at the time an MTech building. Also, during this period of time, we were able, with the resources provided through the community, also through a foundation that was developed, to be able to provide some cultural events and activities, some music offerings, some lectures, some trips to get to, like the Art Fest in Grand Rapids, or other entities of that nature. I guess these are just all things that happened during that 25-year period. Now, during that 25 years, there were times when there was big change going on in the area, so it made big impact at a place like Montcalm. In the early 2000s, 2003 for instance, we find out that Electrolux, previously Gibson and White Consolidated and with other names, but they were leaving the area. When that happens, not only do those people all lose their employment, but there's a lot of vendors that support them, and then more jobs are lost. So literally thousands of jobs, beginning with approaching 3,000 at Electrolux, but then it went out from there. So we're probably in the neighborhood of 5,000 jobs lost in the area. That's a huge impact. So when something like this happens, it's really challenging to have the resources necessary to take care of all of this. But you don't have any choice. You just have to deal with all of these people who've lost their employment or will be losing their employment. And what happens during a period of time like that is within a couple of years, the enrollment at Montcalm nearly doubled. That's a huge impact, and it also meant developing new programs and new understandings of how to deal with all of this, because this is not normal what you're going to have. One of the things that I hope that Montcalm Community College has done and can continue to do, but also the people in the Montcalm area, is to think in those terms. Be realistic about who we are and what we are, and absolutely committed to saying, well, okay, then how do we improve that? Well, what's the next step? How do we move this forward? I don't know that anyone can address something like this in a really pure fashion. It comes from through the lens of their background and who they are and what they are. And we've already talked a bit about where I came from. So with that as background to this, I guess if I were to describe Montcalm County, I would say it's a place. This was a rural, agricultural county, and it still is. Strong agriculture in Montcalm County. It's a place blessed with lakes and trees in green, and it's a place that has small rural communities, but not isolated. It's a place that has very good access to health care. It has good access to education. It's a place that's able to live and work and recreate and compete in a global world. With the technology connections that are out there now, we have a good base here, we have a good history here, and we have good potential.
Connect and subscribe to Discover Montcalm Podcast at discovermontcalmpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube at Discover Montcalm Podcast. To be featured in an upcoming show, contact Duane at 231-250-9624. Remember to subscribe at discovermontcalmpodcast.com.